Hello, Grand Rapids and all of YouTube, and welcome to PaleoRadio. My name is Joe Elder. I am a co-host of PaleoRadio alongside our other co-host, Mr. Jeremiah Bannister. How are you, sir?
Dude, I'm doing awesome, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. You are doing awesome. You've been doing some awesome things. In fact, we were at CFI just yesterday, and you had a speaking engagement there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Oh, I rocked the socks off it. Not really. I did good, I guess. It was a bunch of fun, dude. It was a couple weeks in the making. I was approached by Justin Schieber of Reasonable Doubts. He's the facilitator of Cafe Inquiry. It's an event that takes place every Sunday at Schuler's on 28th Street in Grand Rapids, hosted by Center for Inquiry. And he asked me if I would be willing to do a speech, and so I did one, and it was generally over the topic of Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind. But what I did is I took just a couple things I really wanted to focus my attention on, dealing with why we have such conflict, why we have such partisanship and sectarianism and distrust and prejudices that come along with that, and what we can do in a really practical sense in order to try to deal with that in the most productive way possible. But it was fun. It was a great time, and you were there, dude.
Yeah,
yes, you were there.
It was a lot of fun. It was a great discussion, and I'm sure we'll have more time to delve into that.
Right.
You had some other things going on. What else is going on with you?
What else is going on with me? Well, I'm being interviewed tomorrow. Well, there's been a lot of things. People can find out the litany of things that I've been involved with over the last 2 weeks. But tomorrow, I am going to be interviewed for the first time to a Christian audience. By John Mosman on John Mosman Live regarding my conversion, my life as a Christian, my eventual apostasy, and then my return on PaleoRadio with Joe Elder, and where we want to see things. And so that's going to be tomorrow. But if you're interested in all the other things, it involves newspapers, nativity scenes, schools and colleges, interfaith panels, all this kind of stuff that's been going on. If you want to learn all about that, paleoradio.us. And find us on Facebook as well.
That's right. Yeah. Yes, there's been a lot going on with us. There's been a lot going on across the country right now, too. National protests. We over not only Michael Brown, but also Eric Garner. And there's been some big things that have been going on in New York City as of late. Basically, what has happened is Eric Garner was a man who was selling cigarettes in New York City. They call them Lucy's, but selling individual cigarettes tax-free. And what had occurred was Daniel Pantaleo, or I believe that's how you pronounce his name, I'm not really sure. But Daniel Pantaleo is an officer who put Eric Garner in a chokehold and actually killed him. And this has been news that's been going on across America for a long time. There's been protests that have been set in. In particular, there's been a New York seminary downtown that's been basically a hub for protests because Mr. Pantaleo he was not indicted by the New York police. He was, I don't even know if he was on leave or suspension. Do you, Jeremiah?
No. No, yeah. I don't. And I think it's Pantaleo.
Pantaleo, thank you.
Pantaleo. Daniel
Pantaleo.
But it wasn't published quite like Darren Wilson's, right? Like, I mean, it wasn't pushed in the same way. Darren Wilson's an easy one for people to remember. But there was a piece that I saw on Katie Gordon's wall. Katie Gordon is a friend of ours here in Grand Rapids. She is involved with Kaufman Interfaith Institute at GVSU. And she worked with one of the groups that was talked about by Jack Jenkins on Think Progress. There's a seminary there in New York City that's been involved with the protest movement. And she shared this link, and I thought it was really interesting. It's entitled, How a New York Seminary Became a Hub for Eric Garner Protest. Once again, it's by Jack Jenkins at Think Progress, and he says this, quote, clergy, seminarians, and people of faith are taken to the streets of New York City, and other towns across the country, making religious calls for justice as they join the wave of protests decrying the death of two black men, Eric Garner and Mike Brown, at the hands of white law enforcement officials. The place that they're talking about is Union Theological Seminary, and Union Theological Seminary, unsurprisingly, is historically progressive, right? It's in Upper Manhattan, and not long after the verdict came out, right, the grand jury decided that they weren't going to indict the police officer, they formed they put together a room. They basically took over one of the rooms there, and they call it the protest hub. There are some students there. They call it the love hub, and they've been part of the whole organization process there with the die-ins and there's a whole bunch of things, shutting down streets. In fact, you were showing me a picture just 2 days ago of one of the protests, just a massive wave of people, as far as you could see, out in the streets, and they're part of that. And I just thought it was really cool because, you know, it's seeing somebody local, a friend of ours who's involved and knew these students for other reasons, and the excitement surrounding their involvement with this. I just thought that was a really cool thing, and figured I'd kind of throw that out there.
Yeah, well, and I think it's a cool thing too, because it shows that although there are things that we do disagree with, vehemently disagree with, especially since I'm a secular person, or Jeremiah's a secular person, we do disagree with people of faith in many different areas. In this case, we don't, and there are more cases where we can come together on issues than there are where we need to be separated. And I believe an issue like this is one of them. I think it's a great thing what's going on at the Theological Seminary in New York. And I hope more things like that occur. And I think that there are times in society where everyone collectively has a moral idea that this is just wrong. And they can seriously, and I know it's the cliche thing to say, but they can cast aside things that they disagree with, serious things they disagree with, and come together on issues that they want to see change. And that's something that I think we're seeing now, and I hope it continues.
Well, and some people aren't so reasonable, Joe. Right. In fact, some people are unreasonable while saying that they're being reasonable. Right. They're insisting that reasonable people can say these unreasonable things. Here's one example of such. Jonah Goldberg, National Review Online. Right. He wrote a piece called "Rand Paul is Right About Eric Garner," and this is how he starts out. Right. Reasonable people can disagree on whether racism was involved in the tragic death of Eric Garner. My own suspicion is that this misfortune could have transpired just as easily with a white man resisting arrest and or a black cop choking him. And even though lots of people don't want to hear it, reasonable people can disagree on whether illegally excessive force was to blame. Personally, watching the ubiquitous video of Garner's arrest, it looks like excessive force to me. But the simple fact is that Staten Island grand jury saw evidence that led it to conclude otherwise. People should at least entertain the possibility that it might have got the ruling right. I'll end the quote there.
Wow.
All right.
It's interesting. It makes me think of a football analogy. It makes me think of if a dirty player were to break your leg, someone would say, well, if he hadn't been playing football.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's exactly what it makes me think of. It's let's be disingenuous about it and not blame the real cause, which is the dirty player. Or you can say it's a bad barrel. I understand this argument that it's a bad barrel argument, and I do agree in certain tenets. But I think the part that I disagree with is part of the systemic bad barrel is racism.
Right.
And part of the breeding and brewing of this dissension that we're seeing is because there's systemic racism in the police.
Right.
For example, I bet my farm, my life, that on the daily beat, the police stop over a group of minorities that are sitting together, stopping on the sidewalk. I'm sure that he'd like to stop by and ask them what they're doing more often than he stops and asks 4 white people what they're doing if they're standing on the sidewalk. I think that's just mathematically true, and I think there's a systemic reason for that, and it's underlying issues of assuming that minorities are up to no good more than white people are, or the group in power, which I simply disagree with.
What do you think about Rand Paul's remarks? You know, Rand Paul, I'll quote him at length here.
Sure.
Rand Paul was on MSNBC's Hardball with Chris Matthews, and this is what he said, quote, "I think it's hard not to watch that video of him saying, 'I can't breathe, and not be horrified by it. But I think there's something bigger than the individual circumstances. I think it's also important to know that some politician put a tax of $5.85 on a pack of cigarettes. So that's driven cigarettes underground by making them so expensive. But then some politician also had to direct the police to say, hey, we want you arresting people for selling loose cigarettes. For someone to die over breaking the law, there really is no excuse for it. But I do blame the politicians. We put our police in a difficult situation with bad laws." And then he ends by saying, when you pass a law, you authorize law enforcement to enforce it.
You do authorize law enforcement to enforce it. I agree with that, but I don't think that that brute or violent use of force is within law enforcement's realm. So again, it's like the dirty player. He's saying to take that same analogy, it would be Rand Paul saying, well, in football, people do get hurt. You got to play, and it's a rough sport, and there are rules to the game. And if you don't play, you wouldn't hurt your leg, despite if there's dirty players or not. And it's true. It's true. It is true in the sense of that exact situation would not have occurred in the fact that it was white police around one black guy over a cigarette. But people that are looking at this from a bigger example are saying it's not really that law that got them around there. There's plenty of other situations where there's predominantly white police around a minority who's a black person for whatever the reason is, whether it's he's stopping him on the street because he's wondering what he's doing, or he's just walking down the street with iced tea and Skittles, or whatever the heck they're doing. They'll look at that group and they'll stop and pay attention to that group more than the others. And that's an issue.
You know, there is something that I agree with Jonah Goldberg about over at National Review. He points out that libertarians rightly understand something better than anybody else, and that's that the state is about violence, right? That you can talk all day about the idea that the state's just kind of this place where we get together and do stuff, and that's definitely an element of it being public. It's what fundamentally at its core, it's what should be going on. But what makes government work is the fact that it has a monopoly of force, right? In this way, and of enforcement. And so, like, I think once you have a state and you start thinking about what does it mean for something to be a law. I mean, like, for example, there's $5.85 worth of taxes, I think, on a pack of smokes. That's almost what it costs for a pack of smokes in Michigan, right? Like, I mean, it really is. Like, cigarettes like $6, $5, $6. Whereas in New York, it's like $13 on the shelf. But that once you enact that law and you say, well, we want to up the ante on how much it costs to try to get smoking down, and that's that's a popular approach to it. Is we want to stop people smoking so much, we're going to tax it, and so they tax it to that degree. There's also within those laws, there's an element of enforcement, right? If a law can't be enforced, it's no law. I mean, it's something maybe, but it's not. It needs to be enforceable. And so if you do this law and it has to be enforceable, it has to be enforceable by enforcers, right? And if you have a situation where something costs $13 for a pack of smokes, you are going to have a loose cigarette market. That's just a reality of an otherwise addicting situation, right? I mean, just if nothing else, it's a habit. People desperately crave these things. And so when you do that, you're going to have an encounter where the enforcers of a law are going to come into contact with violators of said law. Yes. But saying all of that, I don't know what all that helps necessarily in Rand Paul's case. I mean, I agree with him. They shouldn't be taxed like that. I agree with him. But I don't understand why that would be seen as the right way to lead this conversation and say, well, let's focus on that. I just don't get it.
Well, let's get to the crux of it, and I just ask Rand Paul one thing. Should people be out in the streets protesting the cigarette tax? Should people be protesting right now to go against the military-industrial complex or to be going up against the police state? Like, that's the question is, does he think people shouldn't be protesting at all? Or does he think we should be out in the streets, and we should be out in the streets because of tax reform for cigarettes? Or does he think we should be out in the streets because there is a police state and we need to fight the police state? But is he saying that if we change the laws it would change the police state? Because I disagree. In fact, we can take he used the war on drugs as an example, so I can take that one as well. If you take the war on drugs example, the same percentage of white folks do drugs as other minorities, but we see a prison full of different groups of people, but it's not an equal majority, or an equal spread of white folks in there too. We know that the drug war exists, and we know that it ostracizes and it's authoritative against people. But we also know that white people get a break from it. And that's part of the system, too, in the drug war. So even if we're talking about the cigarette war or whatever the hell he's talking about with the taxes, if he's trying to say that's his main point, I would say I would bet that there are white people that can sell those loose cigarettes and not have a problem with it. Not nearly the same. I disagree with the article saying that it would be just as likely that a white man would have this happen to him with a black officer. I simply disagree. I think white people get treated differently by police than black people do.
I agree with you, and I'll say this: I'll throw a bone in the direction of the Rand Paulistas. Is that I think because the conversation is so broad, right? That we're talking about things to do with privilege, to do with structures of institutions and the like. I think that adding this is not a problem. I think making mention of the fact that you have $13 packs of cigarettes, I think that that's a serious thing, and whether or not it warrants going out on the streets, I mean, I don't know. People have protested for less, but at the same time, that is a big deal in many different ways. And so, what I wouldn't want to see happen with any additional factor being thrown into the conversation is to really miss point on what is the fundamental point of it all, right? Or what is at the core of this problem, and what is the most widespread issue that you don't have to live in New York City to deal with this. Right? Because not everywhere in the country do we have people dealing with $13 packs of cigarettes. Almost everywhere in the country we're dealing with, or everywhere in the country we're dealing with systemic forms of racism, institutional forms of racism and of privilege. And those things need to be addressed. All of this needs to be addressed. But I would hate for Rand Paul's remark to lead people in directions that would be counterproductive for what is obviously becoming something that this country has to deal with in an urgent way, in an urgent manner, because it's not an isolated situation. It's all over the country, as the protests are evidence of, and we're seeing it more and more and more. And like you said, this is something that we know we're going to talk about again, right? In almost in the exact same way. In fact, we could talk about it again right now in the exact same way with other cases, just a large number of cases around this country, not only right now, but within, I don't know, forever. you can look back and say, let's look at this and let's see how frequent instances of this nature actually come up, and what this says about our institutions and about the way that our culture is set up and the way that it's developed over the years, while having as a key feature institutions like slavery, or laws on the books that were just so grotesquely divisive. And so we need to deal with this. I think that it's fair for Rand Paul to bring it up. I think with all the different things people are bringing up connected with injustices to do with these injustices, it's fine. But I would hate for people to then get so caught up in other things that they really miss point of something that's so bad that it is bound to happen again, and in numerous places around the country.
Yeah. Do you think it would be fair to ask Rand Paul a question saying, do you think it's about perspective? As in, do you just feel like maybe he's putting the perspective on the wrong thing? Where he is right. I agree that Rand Paul's right, and I think that the taxes are crazy. I don't think the taxes are why Eric Garner was put in a chokehold. I think the taxes are the reason why police got there.
Right.
And he's right to that point. But from the point on of the police getting there, I think it was kind of a hint of saying, well, he resisted arrest, and by resisting arrest, that's why it happened. And it's because our police are taught or not taught that it's a problem if you put someone in a chokehold.
Oh yeah, it's definitely about perspective.
It's a perspective question.
It's a perspective question, and you know what? And I didn't watch the interview. I haven't seen the entire interview with Chris Matthews and Rand Paul. But I would say this is that even from the quote that Rand Paul gave, it doesn't sound like he's denying or undervaluing the facts of the matter, the big stories here, right? That he's simply bringing this up as another valuable factor to say how this confrontation even took place in the first place. How did we even get to the place where Garner and cops were facing off at all? Yeah. In this specific thing, right? Yeah. In this particular one, in this specific place. But yeah, that's a matter of perspective. If we can just say that, talk about it, put it in its proper place and perspective within the overall conversation, absolutely. I see no problem in adding that to it as long as it's got the right perspective.
Absolutely. All right. Hey, new topic. Good topic. One that I've been waiting to talk about. Science topics. Woohoo! Vox.com. This is a title that may come as a little bit disconcerting to people that I say yay science and then followed up with this, but scientists scammed at least 110 academic papers into publication using fake peer reviews. This was updated by Susanna Locke on December 7th of 2014. And basically what it was saying was there are some old age ways of cheating in sciences, fabricating data and plagiarizing text, but apparently there's a new cheat on the scene. Over the past 2 years, more than 110 scientific papers have been retracted from people rigging the peer review system, mostly by posing as independent reviewers and then evaluating their own articles. Kat Ferguson, Adam Marcus, and Ivan Oransky recently delved into the problem in the news features published in the journal Nature. They described several cases where researchers gave journalists fake email addresses for other scientists and then pose as the scientists to give the positive reviews of their own papers. The news features also highlights how many journals reviewing processes software doesn't ask for any identity verification, which is a problem. These cases are part of what appears to be a recent spat of scientific malfeasance. So what's going on here? Is this just a uniquely bad run, or is this pointing to a bigger flaw in the peer review process itself?
You know, I thought that one of the things in the article that was really valuable was that actually at the tail end of it, they have this little a little box at the bottom. You can has numerous different pages. You can check out different facts and different kind of insights into it. And the first panel on that had to do with what the peer review process is. And so I think it'd be wise maybe to throw that out there, because I think that a lot of people just don't really know what that means. They just, they hear peer review process, they think either it's important or it's nothing, right? And that's kind of it. They don't put much thought into, well, what exactly does that mean, peer review process? And what that is this. This is, I'll read it from this as well. It's usually the case that reviewers are chosen by the journal and kept anonymous so that the review can be as impartial as possible. So we'll stop here. You have somebody that writes a study, right? Puts together a study, has all their controls written out, it's written scientifically, they submit it. The people who are going to review it, the peers who are going to review it, are permitted to remain completely anonymous, and they're allowed to remain anonymous so that they can say what they want to say without fear of repercussion. Right? It's a big deal. These people can recommend revisions to the text, new experiments that should be added, or even that the journal shouldn't publish the paper. Then the paper's authors will generally look at those reviews and incorporate them into a revised paper if necessary. But reviewers aren't asked to do everything within their power to make sure that the results are absolutely correct. For example, reviewers are not expected to try the experiments themselves, and they don't generally look at raw data or rerun calculations. They do look at the manuscript to see if the experiments were properly designed, if the data supports the paper's conclusions, and if the findings seem important enough to warrant publication. There's your peer review process.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, is the peer review process is fantastically important. In fact, the peer review process is what allowed us to figure out that these documents are not valid documents. That the process itself, it's a self-correcting system. That's why I say yay science. Is part of scientific advancement in seeking truth is being able to take parts and theories of what you thought were true before and cast them out into the ether as nothingness. They're done so. We don't need them anymore. We don't need to waste time on them anymore. They're not the truth. And so the peer review process is great at doing this. It basically, from going through here, we had people that looked at it, found out the reviews were false, and got them out of there. Now they have to go back to the drawing board with anything that those peer-reviewed journals had said. They need to cast out anything that they've put, any type of theories they've based or wrote on top of those theories have to be rescinded. And that is something that's powerful if you're trying to seek truth. It's something that's powerful if you're trying to seek logical conclusions. It's something you need if you're trying to seek logical conclusions. And that's why I think science is a proper form of thinking. It's a great way of thinking because it does get rid of the bad ideas. When there's no evidence and it's been peer-reviewed, it's gone to the dustbin of history and we'll move forward. And that's something that I think all forms of thinking need.
And you know, the thing is too is that the people who do this are disgraced. You know, I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, if you go ahead and you publish something that's bogus, phony, baloney, and then you create a whole bunch of accounts, right? These fake email accounts, so that you can pretend to be somebody you're not, and then to suggest that fake account as somebody to appear to review your stuff, and then for you to be that person to review your own stuff. I mean, it's just so grossly, the whole thing is it's so messed up. But when they do that, and they get caught, and like you said, this is a self-correcting mechanism that people are in there who really are trying to find out if this kind of fraud is going on, and if this kind of scamming is going on. And they discover the kind of scamming. And sometimes, like there was 60 papers connected with Peter Chen from Taiwan, right? Mm-hmm. They discovered 60. They discovered 60 that were wrong. People can say that's a big number. Say, well, that's a large number if you don't know how to compare that to how many peer-reviewed papers there were. But more importantly is, if it's a large number, more the better for the mechanism that discovered the 60, right? That said, listen, that's a big number. We have the kind of mechanism that we can go in and we can go after people even of fame, power, fortune, influence, and they can go in and evaluate and say, caught you, gotcha, retracted, boom. That is something that is so powerful for anyone trying to understand the world, someone trying to understand the arena wherein they reside. So powerful because it's a self-correcting mechanism. And I have to say this, and this is a friend of mine on Facebook. His name's Jared. I'm gonna throw this out here. He commented and he said this. He said, the only difference I see between religious faith and scientific faith is the willingness to admit to being wrong and revise opinions based on evidence. This is why I've adjusted my religious thinking to be more scientific, willing to reassess the details of what I believe based on what I've learned and experienced. Science will always have some basis in assumptions and unproven axioms, and there is an element of faith to science. It's just the difference of integrity.
There is no element of faith in science. Nothing in science is based on faith. Everything that's on there is based on the data, and if the data is wrong, they change it, and then they say they don't know. They don't postulate about what they don't know without the evidence. But more importantly, to that statement is where the biggest difference is. It's not just willingness to admit that you're wrong. It's the mechanism in which you use to find out that you're wrong. Religion has no such mechanism. It doesn't have a BS meter. It doesn't have a peer review meter that says what you're saying right now is incorrect. It's not true, and it needs to be thrown out. More importantly, what religion doesn't have is the BS meter that when you get to the point of knowing that it's bad evidence or knowing that it's not useful, you throw that out and you're done with it. You don't keep any portion of that anymore. It's gone. It doesn't work anymore. It's not true. And it's just the fundamental difference between faith and truth, and faith and evidence. They're not one and the same. They're not even related. It's like black and white. They are polar opposite of each other, and you can't have both. There's no way of having your cake and eating it too in this sense.
And I like that science can go so far as to say it seems highly probable, or we don't have enough information yet. More studies need to be done. The conclusions only extend insofar as, etc., etc., etc. Whereas if you go to Hebrews 11:1 and you look in the Bible, it says, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. That is something that you're not going to find in science. Like you're not going to find this. You're not going to find faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance of what we do not see. That right there, that sentence, it seems to be at just a raw enmity with the idea of what the entire scientific process is, what peer review process is, what all of these processes are.
Yes.
It seems antithetical, and so people would have to, religious people, I suppose, and my friend Jared, and I don't want to go after Jared because I like him, he's awesome, but they would have to be able to say that faith as defined here, right, as described here, they would have to show how that is exhibited by science, and I don't see it. I don't see it exhibited in the process. I don't see it exhibited in the way they talk about it, in the way that these things are applied in their conclusions. I don't see Hebrews 1:11 or 11:1 in science.
Well, it can't be, because science requires peer review. A big part of your friend's statement was saying that he changes it based on his own experiences. That means nothing in science. It means absolute jack nothing. Your personal experience doesn't mean anything. What means something is having that experience, being able to predict that experience, and predict it over and over again in the same controlled settings repetitively. And if it can't do that, it's not science. It's not science. It's postulating, theorizing. But it doesn't become a theory until there's the evidence for it. And that's why there's a fundamental divide between religion and science. More importantly, on the lack of the mechanism that detects what is correct and what is incorrect within itself. It doesn't have such a thing. And the lack of knowing when to stop wasting your time on a bad theory. When it is done, and it needs a new one. We don't need to rehash the old bad one over and over again. If we had such a thing in religion, number one, I don't know if we would have religion anymore, but if we had such a thing in religion, we definitely wouldn't have the great divide, or the question of what is Christianity, because it has multiple definitions. It just couldn't happen.
And what do you do when you take on, you're a Christian, you take on the position that what you experience, right, that this can help to inform it, your ideas about trying to be more scientific about what you're approaching. Science is always searching for mechanisms in order to quantify experiences, to see whether or not experiences even happened, right? And experience isn't just something in the brain, right? I mean, it would be like, how would you be able, what mechanism would religion provide to decide whether or not being slain in the Holy Ghost, or drunk in the Holy Spirit, or speaking in glossolalia is actually a real spiritual experience? Mm-hmm. What mechanism do we have to figure that out? I mean, it always kind of throws me back into the tweet you and I received from the guy who knows more about reality than anyone you've ever met in your life.
Yep, and he knows more about the unknown than anyone I've ever met in my whole life.
He's talking about the unknown, and he says that he has these scientific techniques or something in order to peek into the realm of karma, right? And that it's this black substance and stuff. I mean, that scientific process, whatever that is, the techniques that he's got going on, these aren't publicly available, apparently.
No.
I'm kind of wondering, religion would be in the same boat. What mechanism could more scientifically minded religious people invoke to determine whether or not what they say they experienced was actually an experience?
Yeah. Oh, there's not a measurable. How do you measure a broken arm? If you and I broke our arm in the same exact place, Jeremiah, our pain thresholds may be completely different. The same exact act happened on us, and the non-measurable control to that would be our pain threshold. How do you measure it? More importantly, with a religious person, if they say, I have a scientific mind, if they take individual account into favor, they do not. The reason is because science is predictable. It's a big P word. The most important thing about science is it's predictable. What we know now can be repeated over and over again, and that's how we know it's true. To say one day I walked down to the water and I saw an angel and I was blessed, that's not a repetitive thing. And in fact, the faithful way, I always take the story of the person who claims they can hold their breath underwater. I love this analogy. The person of faith, if I came to you and I said, I can hold my breath for 35 minutes underwater, Jeremiah, a person of faith would say, face value, I believe it. I believe it to be true. And they would say, your individual account that you've told me this one time that you can do this is verification that you do indeed have the ability to hold your breath for 35 minutes underwater. The scientific mind looks at that and says, absolutely not. let's find the nearest body of water, and I want to see you hold your breath for 35 minutes. Because I want predictable, repetitive evidence. And that example is a great analogy of explaining just the massive difference in assumption of individual claim and why we in our normal discourse know it's true to use the scientific way of thinking, and that the religious way of thinking falls short in predictability and evidence.
It kind of broadens the scope of scientific expectation that I was mentioning earlier. You know, like how can you determine one way or another whether what you claim to have experienced was actually an experience, but also that what someone else claims to experience was not an experience, right? Or that it was as you, like, how would you be able to describe the experience of another person? Like, let's say, for example, a Christian is talking about experiencing something, and they speak in glossolalia, they speak in tongues. And then let's say that there's Eskimos who speak in tongues, or there's certain Muslims who speak in tongues. The response would be that that's demonic, right? If the Muslims do it, that's demonic, right? If Christians do it, it might not be demonic, right? It might be the Holy Ghost speaking through them. It might be angelic language. But what mechanism could they invoke to say scientifically, to say that what the Eskimo or what the tribesman in Africa or what the Muslim in Saudi Arabia is experiencing during that time of speaking in glossolalia, that is not real, or that it's demonic?
Or what if we do have a measurement that says that they're both real? We even have crazy witch doctors called neurologists that know how it works, because the only similarity is that there's dopamine in the brain and serotonin in the brain, and during both these experiences you get dopamine and serotonin. So I mean, that is the underlying measurement stick, is that it comes from your brain. And if your brain doesn't function correctly, all of a sudden you lose the capability to have these experiences. That's so odd, isn't it? Or is it just true?
You know, this whole thing is so interesting to me, and I want to say once again, I want to thank Jared for the conversation that he's sparked on the wall under the thread to do with your tweet about faith and science. Because as I said, Jared is one of my favorite Christian thinkers. He's a brilliant guy. Speaking of another brilliant guy, I need to throw this out here, tossing the old bone to my man Mason. Mason. He's a volunteer with PaleoRadio. He's here again today. He's helping us out. We always love when Mason's with us. He's a great human being, a really cool guy, and it's been really fun getting to know more about him. And so if you would like to get to know us and get to know PaleoRadio and get to know Mason and other people involved, you can find out more by emailing either Joe or myself. Either one of us would work, and we both have our emails right there on the screen, so you can check us out. You can email us, let us know you'd like to be involved. We've got big things in store. So the last topic of the day, it's 12:13 right now, so let's move on to this. Last one, atheists in 7 states. I think you're the one who stumbled on this, aren't you? Aren't you the one that shared this with me?
Yeah, I did. This is by Lori Goodstein. It's in 7 states, atheists push to end largely forgotten ban.
Right, and it's about a bookkeeper named Roy Tarcaso. He happens to be an atheist. He refused to declare that he believed in God in order to serve as a notary public in Maryland. His case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and in 1961, okay, so this isn't new, in 1961, the court ruled unanimously for Mr. Tarcaso, saying states could not have a religious test for public office. This, of course, is rooted in Article 6 of the United States Constitution. It says no religious test should ever be required for federal office. But we're here 53 years later, and you have 7 states altogether that still have in their constitutions, they still have bans on atheists being in office. And I guess there's 1, 2. I don't know if it was Pennsylvania. It doesn't contain a prohibition, but it does say that no one can be disqualified from serving in office on the basis of religion, as long as they believe in God, quote, and a future state of rewards and punishments. Right? So as long as they believe in heaven and hell, then they can't be disqualified from running. So it leaves open that you can be disqualified from running if you don't believe in that. And so that's why Pennsylvania is kind of thrown in there. But you've got Arkansas, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas. Those are the wonder kids that, you know, honestly, I'm not surprised by any of that crap. I'm like,
that's right.
When those names came out of my mouth just now, I was thinking, boy, why am I just so not surprised by this list here of states where you would have this kind of bigotry on the books?
That's right.
Not surprised.
They also had Todd Stifel in the article. He's the chairman and primary funder of the Openly Secular Coalition, and he had said, if it was on the books that Jews couldn't hold public office, or that African Americans couldn't hold public office, or women couldn't vote, that would be a no-brainer. You'd have politicians falling all over themselves to try to get it repealed. Even if it was still unenforceable, it would still be disgraceful and be removed. So why are we different? Which is a great point. I mean, it is absolute. It's open bigotry. If the vote were to say that no one wanted an atheist in office, that would be one thing. That, you know, I'm not saying that people would that we should have atheists get voted in and expect high numbers, but telling us because we don't have a belief in the afterlife that we have to not be, or we may no longer run for office in general, that's just simply wrong. Yeah, fundamentally wrong.
What would happen if we had a thing there that said Jews can't run for office? How long would that last?
You'd have half the Tea Party saying, well, there were some points back in Nazi Germany that they had that we could they'd do something with it. Honestly, there'd be somebody that would defend it. I bet you. I would bet in the southern states someone would defend it.
Well, and they would defend it. Well, speaking of a defense, there was somebody that actually defended this. And let me say this first. I'll say the person who opposed it, right? Jamie B. Raskin, the Democratic Majority Whip in Maryland. He's also a professor of constitutional law at American University, and he said this, quote, "In the breathtaking pluralism of American religious and social life, politicians have to pay attention to secularists just the same as everybody else. If a Mormon can run for president and Muslims can demand official school holidays, surely the secularists can ask the states for some basic constitutional manners." End quote. Here's what you're describing about the response. This ushers in, right, the response that you would get, I think, maybe even if it was about Jews or any other religious group, and it was tucked away in this historical document, antiquated text. Christopher B. Shank from Maryland, Republican Minority Whip in the Maryland Senate, he said this, that while he believed in pluralism, quote, "I think what they," talking about atheists, "I think what they want is an affirmation that the people of the state of Maryland don't care about the Christian faith. And that's a little offensive."
It's offensive to him that run for office. Thank you, Mr. Shank.
Oh my gosh, dude.
Oh boy.
I'm just like.
Well, what about the slave owners, Jeremiah? You know, like it's the whole argument. That's the same type of argument. Like those poor slave owners.
Black people just want an affirmation of their freedom.
Yeah.
You know, and they want us to go back and change constitutional founding documents that are instrumental in how we do law and order in the entire state for everybody in a representational republic. But that's pretty offensive. Right? Like, how is this offensive at all if that's what they want? They want the same, they want not an affirmation, a recognition. Maybe that's a better word ending in ION, right? Rather than affirmation, recognition, right? An admission that, you know what? Maryland isn't just a bunch of Christians gathered together, right? It's not like if you go to Maryland, you drive in and everything's Jesus land. You don't see that. It's a pluralistic commonwealth. There's a whole bunch of people there, and from all different perspectives, as is evident from the fact that there was a case regarding the bookkeeper, right, Roy Torcaso, right, who went from Maryland, notary public in Maryland. So at least since 1961, there's been one atheist in Maryland.
Yeah, at least one.
At least just one, ever since 1961. But that's the kind of response that you're going to get. And to me, that's just wild. It's just absolutely wild to think that an otherwise, maybe he's not otherwise reasonable. I mean, maybe we're expecting a lot from Mr. Shank. But the idea that an otherwise reasonable person could look at this and say, I can empathize. I have the basic ability to empathize by putting myself in the shoe of another person and saying, what if I was in a country or in a state where it used to just be all atheistic and they had a prohibition against Christians running for office in there? How would I feel if I said, hey, I'm not the only Christian in Maryland or in this area. There's a whole bunch of us. You need to take this out of your founding document. Things have changed. It's basic empathy. It's the ability to look into the eyes of another person and say, I get it. I understand where you're coming from. I hate that too. Right? It's not only doing to others what you'd want them to do to you. Maybe more importantly on this score, it's not doing to other people what you wouldn't want the other people to do to you. It's flipping that around and saying, if you wouldn't want that to be done to you, if you were in a minority, why on God's green earth would you be okay with it? Right? If it's flipped around and so okay with it that you're going to think that even bringing it up is a little offensive.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there are people that believe that, well, I'll never become a minority because this is the perfect system that works, and it just so happens that we're on top of it. So, like, I think they feel like they're on a pedestal, and taking them off the pedestal is the worst thing that could happen for change. And that's the one thing that doing something like this is doing. It's knocking down, in Mr. Shank's mind, I think it's knocking down the pedestal and saying, you're telling me that all of, what was it, Maryland you said?
Maryland, yeah.
That all of Maryland isn't just one group of Christian people? You're out of your mind. And so that's really the angle that he's playing, and is he's saying, we cannot lose this pedestal of saying that this is an okay thing to make sure that anyone with different beliefs cannot run for office. And so I'm not surprised by it. I think that's what you're going to see with people who feel like this is an even playing ground right now for religion. They feel like it's an even playing ground, and Christianity is just winning by head count. And so head count works, and head count wins. So as long as we're winning, it's all equal opportunity right now, and equally religion. And that's why you can call BS on it, is because you know, as well as I do, that it is a pedestal. It's a hierarchy, and there's one predominant religion at the top, and they do things a lot of the time in America to stop other religions or non-religious people from advancing in political office or in any other realm.
Rob Boston brought this up, and actually, dude, I'll just say this real quick in passing. You had Rob Boston on Southpaws.
We did, yeah. We had him on Southpaws on Wednesday. It was a great show.
Yeah, Director of Communications for Americans United for Separation of Church and State. He was on Southpaws. He's also quoted here. In fact, I'll just say this and move on. You can go and you can find Southpaws online, publicrealityradio.org. They've got an archive list, and you can listen to that interview specifically and go into more detail about related issues, in fact, to do with this. But Rob Boston, Director of Communications for Americans United for Separation of Church and State, said this, quote, right now, we hear a lot of talk from conservative Christians about their being persecuted and their being forced to accommodate same-sex marriage. But there's nothing in the state constitutions that targets Christians like these provisions do about non-believers. And then Mr. Ira C. Lupu said this. He's an emeritus professor at George Washington University Law School. Said, quote, of course they shouldn't be in there, talking about prohibitions against atheists running for office. Of course they shouldn't be in there. They're all unconstitutional. They can't be enforced. But he brought up a good point. He said, which politician was going to get up and say, we're really going to clean this up? You know, I mean, this is something that's real, where, you know, tying both of those together, we live in a country right now where the majority has a persecution complex. The majority is under the impression, number one, maybe that they're a minority somehow, and yet at the same time that they're also the majority that's being attacked. And they're also people who don't have power that need to get it, and they're people who have power and need to protect it. And all of that stuff is happening at the exact same time. And on the books, while all of this is happening, are laws like this. Okay, and this is a real problem. But who's going to be the one to say we need to actually do more than just complain about it? We need to actually get it off the books. But this throws it right back to Jamie Raskin and Christopher Shank. here you've got the Democratic whip and the Republican whip, and it really is on its face. And Christopher Schenck has to just know this, that on its face, what he said is absurd. But in the context of all this things going on, he's making a public statement as the Republican minority whip in the Maryland Senate, and he can't agree with the Democratic minority whip. Right? So you have all of this craziness going on, and then you have the kind of sectarianism going on in politics that even when something this obvious is brought up, you can't have people agree because you can't have two teams agreeing with each other on it. Right? I mean, the entire thing, this whole thing is so convoluted. Right? This entire thing from beginning to end, and I think it's really unfortunate. I think that, sure, this stuff needs to get out of the books. I'm grateful that it's not enforced right now. But it needs out of the books, and more than that, we need to realize the condition of the culture we're in, wherein these kind of artifacts from history are not only retained, but that there's actually a push to keep that kind of thing in there, right? And that we don't want to touch that, and not just because the Constitution should never be touched, like it's a magical document. In some cases, many people believe that, even for state constitutions, but that maybe that's something worth going back to. Mm-hmm. And that's a real problem.
It is a real problem. Well, it's a good thing that there are people that have the eyes for change, but exactly the point of saying who's going to stand up and change this bill, that's the reason why we want secular people to run for office, guys, is so we do have someone who would stand up there and try to rescind a bill like that. So it's kind of a chicken or the egg argument. Well, who in Congress is going to introduce a bill to give more rights to secular people, especially if the bill has something about letting secular people run for office? Like, it's a roundabout. Excuse me, but it goes in circles, and that's the problem. It's putting the cart in front of the horse in this sense. If there's no one who's going to stand up for the minority, then you have to at least allow the minority to attempt to run for office to get it to explain itself. I mean, isn't that at the lowest form possible? Even the gesture, isn't that at least a gesture of democracy?
But doesn't it kind of play into the thing, the entire conversation about privilege, that they don't want to permit too much challenge? I mean, honestly, when people want to keep in laws like this, they're truly, I take it as an evidence that they're honestly, they don't have a lot of faith, number one, in the power of Jesus to deal with people himself. But more importantly, maybe in the practical way, is that they don't believe in the strength of their own arguments in a free marketplace of ideas. That they believe that they have to have stuff like that in place, otherwise everything's going to go to hell. And what they mean by that is people won't buy what we're saying in an otherwise free marketplace of ideas. And other groups are going to win. And if other groups win, then we lose our power. We lose that place of privilege in a culture and in a society where we are the dominant force legally, institutionally, etc.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think it is. I think what it is it's a focus on not allowing the free marketplace to be open. You brought up a great point of saying it's calling for a free market of ideas, but also really understanding that there's a line where we just don't allow certain ideas to come in. Now, I feel like you should allow all ideas to come in and allow ridicule to be the line. Ridicule is a fantastic tool for the free marketplace of ideas. So allow these ideas to come in and let ridicule and dismissal get rid of them. You don't need to have it be in your legislature. If it's in your legislature, that's a threat. You're threatened by it. And it is. I believe you have it dead on when you say it's the fear that people will stop buying what we're selling if we see other markets in town, and we need to make sure those markets don't exist.
Well, and they've abandoned Paul, the Apostle Paul's apologetic. You know, where's the debater of this age, right? That the foolishness of God is confounding the wisdom of the world, right? That kind of idea that you can win this, right? That you have God on your side. Really, now it's where is the legislator of a past age, right? Because at that point, it's not about debating, it's not about argument, it's not about being ready for a defense for the hope or the faith that you have. It's none of those things. Instead, it is a legislator put on the books a thing that prohibits that kind of conversation from even taking place in an entire state, regardless of whether or not that state is made up of all Christian people or a more pluralistic makeup of citizenry.
Right, right. So, hey, moving on. Lots of things going on at Paleo Radio. You can check us out or subscribe to our page, Paleo Radio. It's all one word. You can listen to Jeremiah or read Jeremiah and I's blogs at paleoradio.us. And also, we've been working on some speeches together, haven't we?
We have, dude. We're really trying to push this, and I'm really glad you changed your Gmail. Right now, you've got joe.elder.speaker, joe.elder.speaker at gmail.com. We're both really interested in doing this, and getting more engaged, meeting people face to face. So if your group, organization, your church, student body, whatever it is, if you would like to have the boys from Paleo Radio come, either individually or together, and this is what we're really hoping to do, is stuff together, and that's awesome stuff in the works. But just contact us. Our emails are right there on the screen. You can see Joe's when he talks and mine when I talk. Just send us an email, and we'll get in contact with you and see what we can work out. And I want to remind people, too, that Southpaws is tomorrow. With Tuesday and Wednesday, Joe's going to be on WPRR, as he is every week. Tuesday and Wednesday, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can listen to that on 95.3 FM or 1680 AM if you're in the area. They've also got an app you can find online at the iStore, correct?
Yeah, yep. You can get us on the iStore.
And on the Android. So you can listen online. They've got a listen live link for that. And the last thing I want to remind people of is tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It'll be the first time that I've opened up to a Christian audience about my conversion, my life as a Christian, the struggles that I dealt with, my apostasy, and what we're doing now with Paleo Radio. It's going to be a whole bunch of fun. The entire hour, I think, is dedicated to this interview. And I'm excited about it because I'm speaking to a Christian audience. And actually, you know what? This is going to be fun because it kind of dovetails an interview that I had at a Christian university this past week with some specific questions to do with atheism and how interacting with the Christian audience was a lot of fun. That was something I really enjoyed doing, and I hope that you and I both get the opportunity. I'm confident we will.
Absolutely.
To meet more people of different belief systems and engage with them. I think we have a lot of good things going on. We have a whole bunch of reason to be really excited.
Absolutely. And the other thing is the mantra: praise where praise is due, criticism where criticism is due. We're willing to, eat some of the meat, spit out the bone. There are areas where people are right, even if we have massive disagreements. We want to go in and we want to be in interfaith circles. We would like to discuss with people about differences in belief. And then we'd like to go out and have a drink with them or whatever they prefer afterward. The idea is that we're here to share ideas. That's the major focus of what Paleo Radio is. We have ideas that we'd like to share in the marketplace. We want other people to share their ideas. We will have disagreements, but more importantly, we'll be able to learn from each other, and that's what it's all about. But thank you again, Jeremiah, for co-hosting with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, dude, I appreciate it. This show's the highlight of my week, bro.
Mine too, definitely.
Yeah.
And once again, I am Joe Elder alongside Jeremiah Bannister.
And Mason Perkis.
And Mason Perkis. Thank you very much. And this has been Paleo Radio. Thank you again, and hope to see you next week.
Yep. See you.